Hey everybody! Welcome to Friday the 13th, the series. I'm your producer, Robert.
And I'm your guest, Jeremiah.
And after a complete, spoiler-filled recap of the episode, we are going to discuss the show you either just learned existed or always wondered how it existed. We promise the answers will be few and far between because we're just here to have some goofity fun exploring a show that, despite or possibly even because of its faults, isn't good and isn't so bad it's good, but is still somehow oddly charming. Let's dive in, shall we? Welcome to part 3, everyone. I know you're excited to wrap up the thrilling cliffhanger from last episode. Was Florence Stoker Brahms' beard? And if so, in which direction was her own sexual compass oriented? And we'll dive neck deep into more Victorian author shipping in just a moment. But before we do, I just want to remind you my guest Jeremiah has seen every episode of Friday the 13th, the series, whereas I am watching these for the first time as I go. If we've been talking about this episode so long you've forgotten what happens, you can find this episode and all others on YouTube for free. If in doubt, follow the link on the Inner Demon Entertainment website on the podcast page. You can't miss it. I'll also be giving a brief synopsis of everything that happens between the second and third commercial break of episode 13, The Baron's Bride. Jeremiah and I will attempt to predict the future in our Crystal Ball segment, and then we'll conclude with a little more discussion of the episode, including the fictional couplings of characters whose real-life counterparts we'll be discussing at the top of this podcast. Yes, this one is a real/fiction sandwich. Or manwich, I suppose. Now, on with Jeremiah's Proto-Edwardian fanfic.
Most scholars agree that Bram Stoker was a closeted homosexual. I always wonder, are we then distinguishing and saying that he's not bisexual, that he's specifically homosexual? I don't know. Even in Dracula, there's both a great mix of hetero and homoerotic passages and material. There's a lot of polygamy elements to it. The big thing is he wrote a lot of letters to Walt Whitman later in life, and Walt Whitman was obviously a well-known homosexual of his era.
Did not learn that in high school.
They don't talk about any of that stuff in high school back in the day. Hopefully things have changed now quite a bit where kids get a lot of that context. But he wrote a lot of letters that can be basically only interpreted as love letters in a way, or at least not that they necessarily had a relationship, but that maybe Bram wanted a relationship. They were very, very adoring letters.
Bram Stoker, history's first sex pest.
Well, Florence, Bram's actual wife,
Uh-oh.
her previous suitor prior to Bram was Oscar Wilde, who is perhaps the most famous homosexual at the time.
This poor woman.
He was later put on trial for being a homosexual, imprisoned for being a homosexual.
Indeed.
But interesting enough, Oscar and Bram were friends before that marriage happened. Oscar is extremely hurt by this and doesn't want anything to do with any of them for a long time. But they eventually make up and become friends again, so much so to where Bram goes to visit him after he's been ostracized and imprisoned and all the things that happened to Oscar Wilde, sadly, because of his life. I don't know anything about Florence's sexuality. There's probably things written in history books that I've obviously not read.
I don't think so. Sounds like you read them all.
You do have to wonder, given the times, the fact that she went from Oscar Wilde to Bram Stoker. If A, she has a type, or B, she herself is hiding something. Again, Oscar Wilde was imprisoned for being a homosexual.
First man sent to prison wearing a cape.
Yeah, that was the times. You had to stay in the closet for legal reasons, if nothing else, but certainly to not be ostracized from high society, to not be ostracized from achieving anything in the world. So a lot of people would partner up and closet up together.
And this is England we're talking about, folks. England.
It was still technically on the books illegal to be a homosexual in England up until like 1960.
And yet slavery abolished long before it was here.
So obviously this is all very serious talk and you don't want to bring the show down, but that was the reality of things.
I'm beginning to see why you're credulous about how chipper they are when they encounter them in the streets here.
Here's the thing. Let's say maybe Bram isn't quite as closeted. Let's say Florence has this type for a reason. And let's look at what we see in Dracula. A lot of it is expressing fantasies about menage a trois and bisexual activity. Are they picking up Mickey and Ryan here? Why would they be inviting this random couple, this random twosome off the streets to come and stay at their house?
Wow, it's going to get so much hotter when they learn they're cousins.
I mean, that's when it really kicks in, right? In the actual logic of the show, it doesn't make any sense why they're so enthused to invite these random strangers they met on the street 5 seconds ago to come live with them. But if you actually take it in a historical context, you could create a version of this that plays out very differently and has different motivations.
You know, Jeremiah, last time we recorded, I posited that we watched this show on very different levels. I'm going to go ahead and close that loop. Well, that's it. I'm going to have to reach out to Peter and reinterrogate everything in the Scarecrow episode. Actually, that Scarecrow was cruising, according to Jeremiah.
They see that Mickey and Ryan have no place to go.
Oh, no. We're not moving ahead with the plot. You've opened so many doors. Now I'm actually curious. Do you actually think at that time in history, though, Florence was of high enough society and had enough financial means that she could choose her suitor?
Her father was something, and I can't remember what he was, but he was maybe like a high up military man or something like that. Maybe not enough to be notable in the history books, but a recognizable person in high society at the time.
So Brom was marrying up. Because I can't imagine struggling writer at that time and theater manager would have put him in high society.
Well, he was the theater manager for the most famous actor in the world.
A very prestigious theater, but isn't that still considered below the line work or the equivalent of how, for the longest time in history, even the best chef was just hired help?
Yes and no. Let me put it this way. He and Oscar Wilde were both in university together. And even just going to university was a status symbol.
Do you happen to know if they both went to Eton, where several of the recent royals have gone?
Let's see. They would have been schooled in Ireland. I'm sorry. They would have been schooled in Scotland. What am I saying?
Oscar Wilde was schooled in Scotland?
So...
It's okay if there's an outer edge on your knowledge of this subject.
No, I'm sorry. They would have been Irish, right? So they would have been schooled in Ireland.
So Trinity College, maybe?
It might have actually been Trinity College.
I don't know if they were Catholic or Protestant. Brom would have been Catholic to have written Dracula.
I believe so. Yeah. Yep. So with Brom, he'd been writing anything he could, basically, but he was writing theatrical reviews and things like that. And that's where I think him and Sir Henry Irving first came in contact, because I think Henry Irving was really impressed with his writing and his reviews. So that was something he was doing in Ireland post-college. And then that eventually led to him coming over to London to mentor under Henry Irving and run the theater.
Well, that's interesting. It's an early case of a writer starting off writing reviews and then being called up to the big leagues and getting to create a work of fiction themselves.
Yeah, there's certainly examples of that throughout history. But yeah, I mean, that's a very notable one for sure.
Bram Stoker's Dracula. No Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, I'll tell you.
In a lot of ways, Dracula was based on Henry Irving's presence, I guess. And a lot of people described their relationship as Brahms' unrequited love with Henry Irving. He had just so much admiration for him that where you could interpret Brahm was kind of in the Renfield position compared to Dracula being Henry Irving. Such a subservient and obedient person working for this great presence of this actor who's top of the world.
And yet he was writing love letters to Walt Whitman.
He was writing love letters to Walt Whitman later in life.
I was going to suggest that we would probably blow through some of the following scenes, but it sounds like actually you've just taken off your shoes and are going to dig your toes into the sands of the relationship dynamics when they actually get back to Brom and Caitlin's apartment.
I don't think they were channeling any of this sexual history of these characters into the series. My reading is just, oh, isn't that sort of a funny reading? But they go back to their apartment and it's a room where everybody is going to sleep feet away from each other. These are newlyweds, by the way, that are only a month into their marriage. So it's not like, oh, yes, we have an extra room for you guys. Oh, yes, we have plenty of space. Come stay with us, total strangers. It doesn't make any sense.
Speaking of actors in the theater, Brom is played by Kevin Bundy, who, from what I can tell looking at IMDb, I think is still working. He had some kind of interesting projects I'll throw out, including Kung Fu, The Legend Continues, The West Wing, Suits, The Expanse, shot in Canada, I think, Kim's Convenience, and finally Designated Survivor. Last episode, I referenced one of our actors being part of a Walla group. And I did that, one, because that Walla was used for the movie Sneakers, and I like mentioning Sneakers, but two, because Caitlin is played by Susanna Hoffman, who also, it seems like, is still working. And her credits include an episode of Melrose Place, an episode of Goosebumps, an episode of The Outer Limits, that's the 90s version, an episode of The X-Files, and she was part of a loop group for, of all things, Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza.
Oh, interesting. Okay. What was she in Licorice Pizza? A fan of Paul Thomas Anderson, I'm curious.
Oh, no, she was simply part of a loop group.
Which
is something that I didn't even know people get credit for. So I was stunned to see two actors from this episode getting credit for things like Loop Group and Walla Group. No role as such, I'm afraid, but still worked on Licorice Pizza in a slightly more prominent role than I did on Paul Thomas Anderson's, what is that one called? Sorry, let me take that again. It was Inherent Vice, by the way, in case I forget again.
That's right.
So anyway, she worked on Licorice Pizza in a slightly more prominent role than I did on Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice.
That's right. Yeah, you did background work, right, on that one? Is that what it was?
Yes, I worked on it twice, and I was brought out the second time for reshoots, and I and my two fellow news reporters got to set and learn that basically we had been called by accident because we were the one and only background element cut from the reshoot.
Oh. Perfect. Susanna Hoffman, not to be confused with Susanna Hoffs from the Bangles, then.
I'm going to say...
Oh, you can just yes and me if you don't you don't recall the name of the members of the Bangles.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, do I say yes or no? Because it's like someone, this isn't correct, is it?
Right.
Like, wait, do I say yes or no to this? Yes, you are correct. That is not the singer from the Bangles. Was she a singer? I don't even know who that is.
Yeah, she was the singer. She married Jay Roach, director of the Austin Powers franchise, among other things.
Oh, interesting.
She was in that band with Michael Myers, Ming T, which was sort of a parody band that he did.
Michael Myers, as in Mike Myers?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike Myers. Yes, Mike Myers, the
Yes.
Wayne's World alumni, not the serial killer who chases after Jamie Lee Curtis. Correct.
You're pulling a real Baby Driver here.
Right.
I'm getting very confused.
Right.
Was that back when he was doing Love Guru? What is Ming T?
Basically, it was him being Austin Powers.
Before Austin Powers? Was this like a precursor? An antecedent?
Yes, it was the precursor. There was a music video that accompanied Austin Powers, I think also played at the end of credits, about the BBC.
The BBC One, BBC Two, BBC Three, BBC Four?
Yep.
Ah.
Mike Myers in this character, almost like a Spinal Tap type of thing, where he's going out on these talk shows in full makeup, in full gear, as part of his band. And then Susanna Hoffs, who was famous from the Bangles and obviously Walk Like an Egyptian and things like that. She was married to Jay Roach already by this point, famous, mostly comedy director and writer. She also came out in disguise and was part of the band.
I'm going to have to just peel off this Band-Aid. How racist was this based on the name Ming T?
Yeah, it not really, because I guess it doesn't really it's all British. They're playing a British band. It's an odd choice for a name of a band, so I guess maybe just in that level, it's definitely...
So no yellow face is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, it was Austin Powers.
Or am I the one being racist for thinking Ming T would be Asian?
Yeah, if anything, it was Mike Myers in Austin Powers makeup.
Well, good stuff, but they're no Boney M, I'll tell you that. What were your thoughts here on Jagger being hungry like the wolf?
It follows vampire stuff, obviously. I guess more...
Does it, though? Do vampires need to feed every 5 minutes, Jeremiah? That's not a part of the lore I'm familiar with.
Well, he hasn't fed at all yet.
But he only got turned minutes ago?
Or 112 years ago, depending on how you want to look at it.
Oh, I see. So there was probably a huge feast scene that we didn't see with Ryan and Mickey when they get to the apartment also.
Right.
They're not immortal, so by your logic, they should be skeletons when they arrive.
Right. For sure. Obviously, we're condensing time because it's a TV show. You can't watch him build up a hunger over the course of 2 days. You need to get to it quickly.
Oh, no. I'm sure you've got a more elaborate in-canon reason why. No going meta on this one.
He's just become a vampire. He's never experienced this thirst before. I think he has to act on it. What I noted on more was not his need to drink blood, but the prostitute who he chooses.
And since you went ahead and used the oh-so-derogatory term prostitute, I'll have you know that character's name, played by one Emma Rickler, or possibly Richler, but probably Rickler, was listed in the credits officially as Tart.
I'm sorry, as what?
Oh, come on, you know all about Victorian history. Tart.
Interesting.
Bet she was thrilled to tell her folks about landing that role.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. My focus was more on her than him, because trying to figure out, as we've already discussed, what each cursed thing does in the interaction between them all. The bite made him a vampire. The clasp lets them travel through time. And the cape makes him irresistible to women and also immortal. And sure enough, when he approaches this tart, she instantly finds him compelling and looks at him adoringly and follows him into the dark corner so that he can drain her of her blood.
Yeah, my comment in the scripted portion is that this is a very strange interpretation of Dickensian London when this street prostitute and a struggling writer and his wife are all just super chipper about dealing with strangers and offering aid to total strangers for no compensation.
Yeah, London wasn't some small town in Canada. Like, it's a very...
You're right, this does smack of Canadianness, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah, this isn't the suburbs.
And then someone steps on Jagger's foot and then he apologizes.
Right, exactly. And then that person turns around and says, "Don't you dare apologize to me."
Exactly.
You're going to get punched in the nose.
I noticed Caitlin and Brom don't lock their door either.
Right. There's a lot about this overly friendly, overly, like, non-skeptical version of London that is...
Strains credulity.
Yeah. I mean, she seems to instantly be hypnotized by him.
But going back to what I was saying about the actors maybe not all being on the same page, maybe not having a sit down with the director and bringing everyone into the fold in terms of what's happening and why, I just came away from this performance. And I'm not criticizing her performance. It's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
I just did not come away from it thinking she was enthralled. She was understandably startled at first, and then she just seemed...
Like she's just being overly naive and helpful?
She seemed legitimately concerned.
Right.
He just desperately says he needs help, and she just takes him at face value of, oh no, what happened? How can I be of assistance?
I took that as the cape having its effect.
Copy that.
But you're right, it does play out very similar to the Stokers. It just plays out in a way that makes all these good old London folk look very concerned about their fellow citizens of the town, I guess.
And I guess also my thought was, well, of course she's going to follow him down a dark alley. She's a prostitute.
Oh, yeah, also true.
Like, I assume the cape works in the background, so to speak.
Right.
It's the background radiation of love potions. He doesn't have to activate it as such or do anything. I just thought, yes, of course she's going to follow him, so I didn't question him even needing to turn on the charm, to put out the vibe, so to speak.
Right. But he does focus on her, and maybe that's the thing that needs to happen subconsciously. I don't know. I mean, obviously not everybody, because he ran down a crowded street to get away. Not every woman then instantly turned and started chasing after him like he was one of the Beatles.
Oh, how I also wish they'd woven in a Hard Day's Night reference into this episode, given that it's also in black and white.
Well, as you said, this is more Jagger, so that'd be the wrong band.
That's true. Either you're a Beatles man or you're a Stones man. Never the twain shall meet.
You can't...
I mean, Beatles fans can like Stones, and Stones fans can like the Beatles, but you can't like them both equally.
This is the Elvis and Beatles taken a few years later.
You know who does notice Jagger is the feckless constable. Twice he's seen weirdness in his streets, glanced at it for a second, and gone on his way, which does check out. But just given how helpful every other citizen of this fine burg seems to be, it's a little odd he does nothing. He sees a woman with a bleeding face, does nothing. He sees a weirdo in a cape stumbling through the streets gasping, does nothing.
He does it for pay instead of passion.
What happened, constable? You used to be about the law.
Right.
You sold out.
As a throwback to Die Hard, he used to really care, but now he's just working at a constable desk because he shot a kid.
Oh, too soon. The constable was played by John Shepard. He was in such projects as T.J. Hooker, The Equalizer, TV show, not the movies. Quantum Leap, that would be the 90s or late 80s. Help me with that one, Jeremiah.
I think it was probably 89.
That version of Quantum Leap. Guess he had a small role in The Hunt for Red October, of all things. And another submarine movie, Down Periscope, which keeps popping up in my life in weird ways.
Wow. Well, so from Red October to Down Periscope, that is...
Yeah, he's truly done it all ends of the submarine spectrum. But I bring him up because his career breaks canon, as I understood it, in the life of this series. Apparently, he was Tommy in Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, Part 5. I thought only John D. LeMay was in both Friday the 13th, the series, and a Jason movie.
A, interesting. I did not know that. B, I don't want to say only John DeLaMay because it's the same producers, and producers are naturally going to go back to same actors for especially the B and C parts. Oh, let's get that one guy in who came in for that everything.
Yeah, and that movie was 1985, and this was 1987, so they could be just calling him up for a small part.
Yeah. Throughout the course of the show, there's so many small parts that have to be filled. You just want to fill it with someone you're comfortable with. You've already seen their tape. Now you don't need to watch tape again if you just give that guy the part.
Oh, it makes total sense, but I think probably IMDb erroneously stated that John DeLaMay was the only actor to work on both a Jason movie and Friday the 13th, the series.
If you'd asked me, first instinct would have been just John DeLaMay. I guess I wasn't thinking in terms of almost background actors. I wouldn't be surprised if there's maybe some more crossover. Could even come up with those more prominent characters that are only prominent for one episode.
Well, we'll see as I keep working on the show, because I'm going to keep researching small parts. I'll let you know if they do.
This is interesting, though, because I wouldn't be at all surprised if you're a bit part in Friday the 13th series. And then you also, at some point, either before or after, had a bit part in Friday the 13th, the movie series. But Tommy is not a bit part in that series.
Right, that's a big part, if I'm not mistaken.
It's a very major part. It's the part that's more known as the kid. This is obviously the adult version of him that they bring in later. But that's a very prominent part. Even if he's not the most prominent actor known for that part, the one who established that part, still a very prominent part in that movie series.
That's why I was stunned.
Yeah, I find that aspect of it more interesting than just the fact that he played 2-bit parts. I've not seen it in a while, and you barely see the constable. I mean, you do see him, it's in black and white shadows. But just off memory, because even when we see adult Tommy, he's still young.
Yes, the constable seems like he should be much older than Tommy in that film, if my memory is correct.
Yeah, Tommy, I feel like, is 18, 19 kid still.
Sounds about right to me. I was going to say 20s.
Sure.
Well, the character maybe is supposed to be 18, 19, but I'm guessing the actor was probably more like mid-20s.
Yeah.
But this seems like a 30-some-year-old man, maybe 40.
Yeah, go from that to 2 or 3 years later, you're playing London Constable. That seems kind of surprising.
That's why I was wondering if maybe the credit is actually wrong.
It's certainly possible. Yeah, I don't know.
I'll look into it for next time. An exciting cliffhanger for next episode.
I have a copy of Friday the 13th, all the movies over here, so I might at some point do a little side-by-side and see if I can figure it out.
Oh, great, because you'll be back for more.
I will say one thing about... The one thing I did remember about the constable.
This is about the Bobby's hat being period inaccurate.
No, but at one point I just found it funny. His line was something like, "Hey, what do you think you're doing there?"
To a vampire tearing out a woman's neck with his teeth?
Yeah, it's just well, I don't think I'm doing anything. I'm murdering this woman.
Touché.
It just seems like an odd... that's what you do when you see some...
Kid tagging a building.
Right. No, I don't think I'm doing anything. I am murdering this woman.
Right.
And he screams out a couple of times, "What do you think you're doing there?"
So very English.
Not, "Don't do that," or, "Hey, stop murdering that woman," or "Stop, freeze."
He's English, man. It was that or, "What's all this then?"
Right. So...
Those were your options.
I think I would have enjoyed your option actually more.
And also he'd been a full-on beefeater.
Right.
Coming home from his job at the Tower of London.
Fantastic.
If you like the horror genre as much as we do, you can preview the horror comic book Requiem for a Psychopath right now for free at the Inner Demon Entertainment website. Imagine a world in which horror film slashers are real. Then imagine a troubled teen bringing one out of retirement to help him take revenge on his bullies. It was written by me and drawn by friend of the show, Stephen Yu. Again, that's Requiem for a Psychopath on the Inner Demon Entertainment website. And if you dig it, please either review and rate it 5 stars on Amazon, or don't rate and review it at all. Ratings of less than 5 stars send the algorithm into murder mode for some reason. Thanks. I hope you enjoy it. The Bobby finally intervenes, taking the most severe action of all against the fleeing bloodsucker, blowing his crime whistle. Again, credit where it's due, this episode uses quick cuts and sound effects very effectively to create tension, whether the shot is a growling vampire or even this more banal example of a constable blowing his whistle. In Abraham and Caitlin's non-Euclidean apartment, and leftover set from the filming of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Mickey's wounds are finally administered to, as Caitlin informs everyone they only moved in together after they were married. Yeah, given the time period, we all kind of figured. Seems weird you would mention that apropos of nothing. Lady, don't run when no one is chasing you. The episode engages in some anachronism humor when Ryan informs them in America, sometimes people live together before being married. Ryan, I hope that's not how you view your situation with your cousin. It doesn't help that Caitlin expresses her belief America has some strange customs. Oh, like cousin marriage? Mickey is still under the thrall of Jagger, or his cape, or his clasp, or whatever. And I have to say, much like Schwarzenegger playing a killer robot, I think Enthralled is a good fit for Luis Roby. I wasn't expecting a surreal shot of Jagger running through fog in slow motion for no apparent reason, but it's followed by a shot of Mickey waking from a dream, so I'll allow it. She tiptoes by Ryan, passed out in a chair. Ha, poor little guy's all tuckered out. But is stopped by him just as she reaches the front door. Mickey claims the stakes are too high to wait until morning, and Ryan counters you don't hunt a vampire at night. Honestly, they're both fair points and would make for a well-balanced conflict, except Mickey's argument is clearly just pretense, so Ryan takes the day. Their argument wakes Abraham, but he would have been woken momentarily by the throng of angry villagers below, torches in hand. Abraham leans out the window to learn the peasants are in an uproar over the death of a prostitute at the hands of a vampire. I probably wouldn't impugn the show for just how quickly these people are on board with vampires existing, but only moments ago Abraham himself said, "Surely Americans don't believe in such things." Yes, he's Irish, not English, and I'm just imitating the actor, so don't shoot the messenger. Hey, speaking of vampires, boy did I lose the forest for the trees. The headline of this episode should be, "Supernatural creatures like vampires now a part of Friday's lore." Are they going to encounter werewolves, mermen, mummies, Frankenstein's monsters? I mean, bizarrely, Ryan the Lion earlier double-tapped a vampirus and looked bored doing it, so I didn't think much of it at the time, but killing monsters seems much easier for this crew than taking down haunted curios. What did I say about Luis Roby? That playing Enthralled suits her? Well, maybe Jack and Mickey should track down curios and Ryan should spin off into his own show, Ryan the Lion, Monster Hunter MD. Yeah, he's a practicing cardiologist now, too. Thank the network, notes. Actually, maybe this was a secret audition to see if John D. LeMay was up to battling Voorhees himself in Jason Goes to Hell. On the word vampire, we get what might be the show's first rack focus from Abraham at the window to Ryan standing behind him. How delightfully cinematic. Friday, I hope you keep this up for future episodes. Sensing adventure afoot, Abraham tags along as Ryan defenestrates his hard stance vis-a-vis not tracking vampires at night, and after being told by her husband that she can't come with, Caitlin says to an empty room, "I love you, Brom." Girl, have some self-respect. Jagger is on the run from the mob, and it's definitely not a dream this time, so I would criticize the use of slow motion here, but it's just too damn sexy. Black and white photography, low angles, heavy fog, puddles splashing right at the lens. Talk about a cinematic thirst trap. Our troika observed the antecedent of crime scene investigation as maybe a doctor or detective indicates to a Bobby that a woman is dead. But this humble moment turns both the space-time continuum and my brain into a Mobius strip, because there are equally plausible arguments for this being either the first victim or a new second victim. Ryan just mentioned a vampire needing to feed again, which, really? Again? Are vampires hypo-diabetic? But we didn't see a second murder. In fact, we've seen Jagger constantly one jump ahead of the lawmen. So are the authorities still discovering she's dead, when even the townsfolk knew she'd been drained of blood? There have been some weird things going on with respect to time in this episode, underlined by the use of slow motion. I'm suddenly reminded of a passage from The Disaster Artist in which Greg Sestero outlines how an early draft of Tommy Wiseau's script broke reality by beginning a conversation on the phone that ended with a character walking into a different room and continuing the conversation in person with the character on the other end of the call, all because Tommy apparently took a break, then resumed writing without reviewing his last few pages. I honestly wonder if that ever happened on this show. For all the detail I can't make out watching this show as uploaded videos, I can discern they had Jagger run past a cart selling entire garlic strands, as well as other aliens. Is this to suggest that our heroes can obtain the garlic Ryan requested, despite the common belief British cuisine didn't discover members of the onion family until 1983? A cornered Jagger appears to lick his own palm. Did it have blood on it? I realize you're a vampire, but the first step is admitting you have a problem. I'm half expecting to hear Dante from Clerks yell, "Hey, try not to suck any blood on the way to the parking lot." Jagger breaks a chain on a warehouse door and heads inside just in time to peer out as a townsperson screams, "I saw something over there, come on!" and then leads a team of townspeople and bobbies in the wrong direction. Hey, Scotland Yard, maybe you should be leading the lynch mob, if not dispersing it entirely. Jagger catches his breath and or suffers withdrawals, about a 50-50 split on that one. Hey, a cross dissolve. That might be another visual first for the series. Keep digging around in that cinematic tool bag and see what else turns up. At dawn, our heroes arrive at the warehouse, and when Mickey psychically confirms Jagger is inside, Ryan's look of jealousy once again leaves any reasonable person assuming these two are a romantic couple, not cousins. Inside, a pair of birds want to get free of this show so badly they almost collide with our actors, circle, then almost collide with them again. Ooh, they sprung for rats, too. This episode is pulling out all the stops. Jagger ponders his cape, then twirls as he sits on a bale of hay, in the most flamboyant act of taking a load off I've ever seen, and Lord knows I've seen a few. He ditches the cape at this moment, so I guess Jagger has fully embraced the Dickensian vampire lifestyle and intends to stick around. Yeah, every place seems great when you're on vacation, buddy. Now, I'll have to describe a bunch of stuff, then attempt to tease out causation from correlation. I guess, without the cape, Jagger becomes a monster vampire. It's the best makeup job thus far for the series, but I can see it so well because he seems to be standing in a pool of sunlight, so not sure what's happening there. I guess it's okay because it's coming through glass? Then, upon feeling his face, he breaks down, I think. It's the only time we'll see him in monster mode, so I don't think they're tears of joy. I think they're just tears. I don't know if any of this is supposed to have literal meaning, as it feels like Texas Chainsaw Massacre's Dance Macabre. Conversely, our heroes scare up some birds for the third scene in a row, and like all the slow motion, it's starting to feel like Sideshow Bob stepping on all those rakes. Jagger puts the cap on and is not only instantly back to looking human, he growls just for fun, so I presume the cape not only changes his physical form, but his feelings about being a vampire as well. Mickey might actually be a little turned on by the growl, leading us all to wonder how this episode is more sexual than Cronenberg's. Despite all the noise he's making, Jagger gets the jump on our intrepid protagonists and sends Ryan and Abraham flying. Once again, to his credit, Ryan's deftness at literally stabbing people in the back probably would have saved the day, but he's betrayed by Mickey, and Jagger once again tosses him like a wet washcloth. Ryan and Abraham watch impotently as Jagger declares Mickey to be his, and if I have to choose between Mickey being with him or Ryan, I'm cool with that. Welcome to Crystal Ball, the segment where we gaze into the future and let time make fools of us all. Jeremiah, our efforts to prove that John Shepard, the actor who played Tommy Jarvis in Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning, is not in fact the constable in this episode, proved entirely inconclusive, unfortunately. But that got me thinking, do you think that any other actors in Friday the 13th, the series, will turn out to be actors who had small roles in Friday the 13th films?
It wouldn't surprise me. We've covered John Delamay does have a major role in one of the films and obviously a major role in the series.
I'm not counting him for this. So if we take John DeLeMay out and then John Shepard, assuming that IMDb is correct, this one actor was also in one of the films, that's 2 actors already. So we're working with 72 episodes, and we've already had essentially 2 actors that are in the movies that are in the show. Yes, one of those is a major part in both. One is a major part in one movie, a very, very small part on the show, but using that as a Bayesian baseline. Now let's extrapolate. How many more do we think might show up?
I'm gonna go 0.
No more.
It's filmed in Canada. I don't know where the movies were filmed, but I'm gonna assume they weren't filmed in Canada.
I actually thought you might know where each of them was filmed. I know it's not your favorite franchise, but honestly, I thought you might be pretty knowledgeable about the filming locations, assuming they were different.
At some point, it has crossed my awareness, like maybe watching a behind the scenes or something like that, like where at least the first one was filmed, where the campsite was. But off the top of my head, I can't recall, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't feel like it was Canada to me. With that in mind, I feel like your actors are going to really fall into 2 categories. You have your straight up, we're going to cast local, and then you have actors that are going to be flown in. If those actors from the movie series weren't Canadian, were any of them big enough to be flown in? And the ones that were flown in, would they actually be bothered to fly in?
Mm.
There are actors that are going to appear in the show, I'm sure, if it were flown in. But would the fact that you were in the movie and you weren't the Kevin Bacon, someone more recognizable, would it be worthwhile?
Corey Feldman?
Yeah, you're Corey Feldman. Would it be worthwhile to fly you in just for that Easter egg? I don't know. Now, the one thing I think that might weigh against that is maybe if an actor really did develop a strong relationship with the producers to where they wanted to do it as a favor, either the producers want to do it as a favor for the actor or vice versa. Maybe that would be the outlier that would make my answer less likely, especially since a lot of those actors were still actively looking for work and looking for opportunity, and any opportunity would still be considered a good one in many of those actors' cases, just as a working actor. That's not disparaging any of them, just that's the nature of the game in that industry. Until you make it to a certain level, you will call in favors to do a show, But I think I'm going to go 0. And now I'm curious if you have the answer to this. Or are we just going to continue to speculate?
Oh, no, I never have the answer on Crystal Ball. That's just where I ask the question.
Ah.
And then later down the road, we'll let time make fools of us all when I come across the answer naturally.
Well, I'm ready to be the fool, I guess.
Well, 0. That's a perfectly cromulent guess. Here's how I'm approaching it. My Bayesian prior would have been 0 before I started watching the show, not even knowing that John D. LeMay was in both. Then I learned that, and I still would have said, oh, that's a fluke. I'm still going to say that there are no more. So I guess I would not have been doing that analysis correctly, because I should have immediately shifted to a slightly more likely stance. But now that we've had one other one pop up, I'm going to say that there's some precedent here. I'm seeing a trend emerging. So I should say 1, but we still have a lot of episodes left. Just for fun, I'll go 2.
Now, you could approach this, though, we're on episode 13, and we've got 1 so far. So really, if you're going with the statistical version of this, you would say, okay, well, if one's going to show up every dozen or so episodes, you might say, okay, well, actually, I would think there might be 5 more, because we still have 70-some-odd episodes to go.
That would be the purely analytical way of doing it, but I'm with you in that I just also don't think it's that likely for many of the reasons you already stated. So I'm going to stick with my 2, I think.
Do you think that they would be 2 that were already in the movie series? Because this is actually another consideration that might change my answer. Will there be a day player that shows up on the series or as the lead of a particular episode on the series, and then the producer really likes that actor so much to where they want to cast them in the movie? Because John DeLeMay shows up in the movies later. He's not going from the movies to the show. He goes from the show to the movies.
And John Shepard is the exact opposite. He did part 5 2 to 3 years before this.
We're also assuming that credit is accurate, which probably is, but we haven't been able to confirm.
True. I guess I'll go pretty analytical again. We've seen 1 case of each, so I'll say the same thing. Of my 2, I'll say 1 of each. One's going from a film to the show, one's going from the show to a film.
1 of each, okay.
I should be considering how many of the films are already done by this point.
There's not that many movies left, and then also, and I can't recall the full story, but I think after 8, a lot of switchover with the old producers are still involved, but sort of under a new regime at that point. So I think a lot of the people making the decisions and having ownership over the franchise then sees a transition happen as we get to Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X. And then obviously Freddy vs. Jason is its own thing, where it's sort of a split property, completely under a different umbrella too. So yeah, there's not that many opportunities left. That is a good point.
And you're being very gracious, and including Freddy versus Jason and even Jason X. I actually was just capping it at Jason Goes to Hell.
Oh, well, I mean, I think if you're going to count Jason Goes to Hell, you have to count Jason X too. Freddy versus Jason, you can sort of count as being outside of it. That very last Friday the 13th came so much later to where it's kind of its own thing, and even it sort of seemed like it wasn't clear on if it wanted to be a sequel or continuation. But I feel like you kind of do need to count Jason X. As I'm thinking about it though now, I might be really off on what timeline that was. That actually might have been a lot closer to Freddy versus Jason than what I'm thinking it is, and a lot farther from Jason Goes to Hell. So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe that shouldn't be counted. I was thinking it was late 90s, but maybe it's even 2000.
Well, Jason X was 2001.
Okay.
And Freddy versus Jason was 2003.
Okay, so those two are closer together. And when was Jason Goes to Hell?
That was 93.
Yeah, that actually was throwing me off, because Jason Goes to Hell is the one where the glove of Freddy shows up. And then it's a decade before that actually pays off So yeah, there's really not that many more opportunities then. That's a good point. And maybe our Ryan and Lion really took that one spot that they had, you know?
Very true.
I still think I'm going to stick with 0. If it's a binary thing of some or none, then maybe that would change the probability that I'm doing in my head. But if it's pick a number, I think 0 is the safest number.
Agreed, but I'm just trying to make it a point to think more probabilistically, so I'm going to go ahead and say 2. Editorial Robert here, speaking to you from the future. When Jeremiah asked me why, if I was being so analytical, I wasn't predicting 5 actors. I essentially said my gut instinct was to agree with the reasons he had stated. Although this is true, it makes it sound like I was being rational to a point, then chucking that rationality out the window in favor of either gut instinct and/or a priori reasoning. In truth, it's the opposite. I'm not an expert on Bayesian prediction, or even prediction in general, but my understanding is that one begins with a theoretical prediction, then refines that with empirical evidence. In this case, before watching the show, I would have predicted that 0 actors were in both the series and at least one movie. Upon learning John D. LeMay was in both, my all-too-human instinct was to write that off as the exception that proves the rule, and to double down on the belief there can't be any more, despite having just been shown it is possible. After discovering John Shepard likely makes 2, I, being a fallible human, still want to argue these outliers have used up all the anomaly spaces, and there couldn't be any more, despite seeing a trend line emerging with my own eyes. So, I Mr. Spocked it, fought my ego, and shifted my prediction to 2 more. Now, why not more than 2? Why not the even distribution Jeremiah proposed? Simple. Because the Bayesian prior of 0 is not only not tossed out, it continues to act as an anchor on all observable data moving forward, dragging Jeremiah's 5 down to my 2. This is all back of the napkin math, of course, and it's built on sand in so much as we have doubts about John Shepard being in both. But it's the process that's important, and I feel like the process I'm using is sound. That said, it's possibly more likely both hypothetical actors in my prediction would be actors from a movie that will appear on the show, given how many movies versus how many episodes of the show are left. However, again, I don't want to discount the observable evidence that we have one of each. Now, after all that carefully reasoned analysis and attempts at self-improvement, let's kick back and watch Jeremiah be 100% correct. When we get back from commercial break, the Bobby, the constable, I suppose, chases Jagger off. We cut from there to inside Caitlin and Brahm's home. And once again, Ryan's wardrobe is 80s-ing so hard. It could not be more anachronistic in this setting, and I absolutely love it. He's got the skinny tie. He's got the plaid jacket. Just, you should be walking out of any music video from the 80s.
It is interesting that this is the outfit that he chose to go rent a room in, but...
to go vampire hunting.
Right.
But to go curio retrieving. Absolutely. And I gotta be honest with you, I am so glad that they're addressing Mickey's wounds in this scene. They could have cut past it and just had her face cleaned up and we could have assumed it happened off screen, but it's just nice that they are addressing it. Kudos to the show.
Especially, though, given the fact that they didn't address it at all when Abraham and Caitlin were originally meeting these 2 people in the street.
Exactly my point.
There's this little bit of awkward dialogue exchange where they're making small talk and Caitlin says, "We only moved in after we were married."
I think I know where you're going with this. It's in my scripted portion. Please continue, sir.
Ryan responds with something like, "You guys never lived together before you were married?" And then both Abraham and Caitlin look shocked by this. They're like, "We've never heard of the likes of that. Such scandalous behavior. Is that something they do in the States? How crazy."
Well, that offends my Catholic sensibilities.
Then why did this conversation start with her clarifying, "We only moved in after we were married"?
Jeremiah, you're not going to believe it, but I wrote in this script, seems like an odd thing to say, girl, don't run when no one is chasing you.
Right. So, yes, like if in your mindset, that's your only option, then you don't need to say it.
Exactly.
It's like saying, I only wash my silverware after it's dirty. Like, what? Yeah, doesn't make sense.
Couldn't agree more. It doesn't happen here, but just piggybacking off of what you just said about lines that just kind of stood out to you. At various points, Ryan will either mention that they're hunting a vampire or he'll list what they need to do to kill a vampire. And there's one particular line, not this scene, it's going to come in a minute, where he says, vampires have to feed on blood. He just sort of lobs that out there. It kind of popped because of what you were saying before about how these shows would probably get some of those notes to the script.
Yeah.
We need to have the characters say things so people that are kind of paying attention but also kind of looking over the newspaper or washing dishes in the next room can still follow the show.
Probably is one of those cases to a degree. Also, maybe just awkward writing, honestly.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to give the show a little credit here, man.
Well, because, likewise, there's a bit where Abraham says something like, all this vampire talk's starting to make him think that these Americans aren't right in the head. And my first thought of that is, yeah, maybe that's a good reason not to invite these people to stay with you. Like, to be literally sleeping feet away from your brand new bride and yourself in your home.
Since you broached that subject again, I'm going to have to bring this up. I was thinking about what you posited last time, your supposition that Brom and Caitlin are actually swingers.
Yeah.
And I just got me thinking this scene where they're all in the same room, but Ryan's sleeping, I think, in a chair with his feet up on an ottoman or something. I think Mickey's on a couch, and then Brom and Caitlin are in a bed in like that weird raised back part of this strange room.
Yeah.
It got me thinking, well, there was a time in television when a man and wife had to sleep in separate beds. So
swinging couples have to...
Maybe this is how you depicted orgies in the 80s, Jeremiah.
Yes, this could very well be. Yeah, like, they're all in the same room. They're literally feet apart. It's not a giant place. It's not, you can stay in our guest room. Oh, no, you can stay in our honeymoon bedroom a few feet away from us. No big deal.
Which is super weird because in my memory, my thought was, well, they're poor, they're struggling, they're essentially living in like a converted attic. But this previous scene completely belies that, when that downstairs looks really nice.
Yeah.
And also has plenty of furniture they could be sleeping on if the man's literally going to sleep in a chair.
Yep, no, 100%. There's some scheming going on here between Abraham and Caitlin to have an adventure.
I have read your literature, sir, and I am more on board than ever. Sign me up for your cause. I am Team Swinger over here.
Yeah, just wait for the unrated version of this episode, folks.
Release the orgy cut.
Send in your fanfic to Robert at.
So we get a little transitional scene here of Jagger just running down an alley, which is also in slow-mo, which again, I thought it's a beautiful shot, but kind of weird that they use it sometimes one way and sometimes another way. In this case, it's kind of a dream sequence. It might be happening, but it's also something that Mickey is either dreaming about or visualizing. At least that's the implication here. So I'll allow it, but...
I think that one makes sense because it is something where you're not quite sure if it's real or not. And even if it is real, it's in her head. She's seeing it, which you sort of do want to indicate that somehow.
I'm cool with that one, even though it's a little bit different use, and I feel like they're leaning on the slow-mo pedal a little heavy, but it does look very cool. I'll give them that. It's a beautiful shot.
And that's a relatively simple, inexpensive thing to shoot that can make the episode look like it's doing more, make the episode look like it has a greater sense of style than what they often have times to execute with something really simple to where, yeah, I could see why they would make that choice, at least in this case.
Speaking of stylistic touches, this episode also does something that I think only one previous episode did, and that's use voiceover to actually hear a character's thoughts.
Yeah.
At some point later, we'll hear what Jagger is thinking, essentially, courtesy of voiceover from him over a shot of him in which he's not speaking. And I think one previous episode did that, but it's a rare stylistic touch on this show.
What was the episode that did it before? Do you recall?
Not off the top of my head. I feel like it was pretty close to this, something maybe in the 5 to 10 range, but I can't think of where they did that. I just remember noting it because it's something that I'm not used to seeing in TV shows, and maybe you can speak to that. Was that more common back then?
Oh, no, not necessarily. We discussed Dark Shadows. They would often utilize, but it was almost more like a narrator, like someone reading from their diary.
It wasn't one of the characters on the show. It was an objective.
No. It would be someone on the show, but it would be they're reading from their diary while you're watching a scene. The main love interest of Barnabas the vampire would be narrating her thoughts of being in the estate or on the castle or coming across Barnabas or whatever it was. And you'd see the scene playing out, or you'd see her wandering through the halls as that narration is going. But it feels like it's more a page from her journal than necessarily those thoughts at that moment. It's more of what she later writes down as her thoughts in that moment.
It's like if we heard Patrick Stewart saying Captain's Log supplemental, but then cut to a shot of him practicing his flute or something.
Yeah.
Instead of just being used over a transitional shot of a starship traversing space.
Yeah, the dictation is fitting the scene that we're watching.
Another mention of dark shadows? Bet you didn't see that coming. And we're almost halfway through the episode. That means we'll have this one all wrapped up in just 3 or 4 more podcasts. Jeremiah, you've always been the guest. I should know, sir. I've always been here. Next time, we'll resume with an angry mob that has somehow already figured out a vampire is loose on the streets of London, and Jeremiah and I will probably spend half an hour trying to figure out and or arguing about just how many tarts have been killed by Jagger in the hours since he time traveled. Is next episode the one that finally breaks us? Tune in to find out. Thanks for listening, everyone. We know you have a lot of choices when choosing a Friday the 13th the Series podcast, and we sincerely thank you for choosing ours. Special thanks to Joshua Romeo for original music and to Stephen Yu for original art. And be sure to check out the Joe on Joe podcast, the only podcast where Joe Schlepsky discusses G.I. Joe. If you want to support our show, you can leave a review and rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. If you want an occasional update on our projects, you can sign up for our newsletter at the Inner Demon Entertainment website. And if you want to complain about social media with us on social media, you can find links on our website. And always remember what Carl said to Frylock. It don't matter. None of this matters. Good night, everybody. Intrepid protagonists. Wow, rural juror.